Okay, today we're going to do a quick review, and then we're going to jump into readability and legibility and how typography, how you need to think about those two features. So the review of this was anatomy lessons, and you guys have turned in your T is for type project, and those were capital letters, so we didn't have a lot of the X height issues going on because we were all cap letters going up to the cap line. Hopefully you had fun with that, and from reading some artist statements from the morning class, it seems like it was a little harder than maybe you thought, or it took a little bit more challenge to keep coming up with different versions of a letter. All right, anybody have any favorite fonts yet that you found when you're out doing things? Anybody like typography? Thank you. Oh my God, we have one person alive in here. Does anybody like type? If you're a designer, you better like type a little bit. Even if you're going to be an illustrator or something else, you better like type. Okay, so here's some different fonts. Any of those annoy you? Do you love any of those? Do you like any of those? If any feelings whatsoever deep down in your heart? Yes.
The brush script, I feel like it's kind of hard to read.
Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. That's the one that I'm annoyed with. It gets overused. It's like Comic Sans. It's everywhere. Hard to read. It's also, there's a drop shadow on it, so that doesn't help either. Well, there are on all these. All right, so we're going to talk about our type choices today and how, if it is expanded, condensed, italics, bold, semi-bold, tall X height, short X height, it's all going to have a dramatic effect on how we are able to read the page. So it's very important. So I'm going to show you a video. This is the font conference, and this is a bunch of fonts as if they were human beings. And if y'all don't laugh, you're not awake. Pause. Turn up volume. Turn up.
Welcome back, fonts. I see some familiar typefaces and a few new ones. Today we'll decide whether or not to offer membership to Zap Dingbats.
Oh, Wayne ain't bad enough. I'm sick of pandering to these artsy parts.
You should really expand your worldview, Harry.
How do you think he treats me all the time?
I agree, we must preserve our culture, not have it be bastardized by these childish cartoons.
Nein, bring die Freundschaft, das Herzchen und der Regenbogen.
You're right, I'm sorry. Here, take my seat.
Let's weigh the pros and cons. Baskerville Old Face?
And I was just a 4-point font as a font. Letters were good enough for us, not these damn doodlies. I won't stand for it.
You won't stand for it.
Oh,
You can't stand for it, you shriveled bastard. You'd probably break a leg.
Oh,
Now, what do you think, Martin?
But I think it's poppycock. Our charge is to illustrate ideas, reason, and logic. Yeah.
Right, I'm doing it from the year 2094 with important news. We must act quickly to avoid disaster.
Not now, Futura. We have to reach a decision.
Oh, hello, Butts. Ransom. What are you doing here? Come on, get with the times here, Roman. I know your system like the back of his hand. Just ask your friend, Courier.
What have you done?
Oh, don't worry. His daughter's keeping him company. Say hi to the nice men, Curls MT. If you ever want to see them again, I want primary placement in every Word, Notepad, Photoshop, and Final Draft document. As well as Microsoft Works.
You're insane! Nobody uses Microsoft Works.
You have 2 minutes. For every minute after that, Courier and Curls MT will lose one of their servants.
I tried to warn you.
You know, if you think about it, is losing Courier that big a deal? I mean,
You all deserve this for conforming. I'm in a room full of sheep.
I can't wait for you to come up.
Wingdings? Pencil, telephone, hourglass, diamonds, candle, flag.
Guards, get him out of here.
The mouse! Scissors, ball, mailbox! is up, Fonz. Which one of you do we make Sans?
Not so fast, Ransom.
Comic Sans!
The boldest of them all.
I hate you so much.
Thank you, Comic Sans.
Farewell, citizens.
Airplane 8-ball, yin-yang glasses. Mailbox. Open mailbox.
Okay, if you don't laugh, you're not awake, people.
Lizard eyes.
That was pretty funny. I do say so myself. All right. Back to one of these many, many, many tabs. Goodness gracious. All right. Let's talk real stuff. Chapter 4 in the book is on legibility and readability, which are a smidge different. A lot different, actually. So let's talk about legibility. That can be defined as how easily you can recognize and differentiate different letter forms. So if I tell you that something's written in Arial, and I say, can you recognize a capital A from a letter J? What's your answer? Yes. If I give you some highly decorative black letter type, and I say one is a D, one is a J, might you have a harder time figuring it out, the legibility factor of it? Okay, so it's how easily you can recognize and differentiate the different letter forms. So there's a few features that help make a typeface legible. The X height. So from the baseline up to the cap line, wherever that halfway point is, that's the X height, and it can be halfway, it can be more than half to be a taller, or it can be a lower X height. So if you think of like Bodoni or some of the modern typefaces that have the real small X height, the reason that they can be harder to identify quickly is because think of a lowercase letter d. The counterpart is really small and the ascender looks crazy big, and it's just because the counter isn't as big. So number 2 is large counters. Having that negative space inside the letter form makes it easier to see the shape of each letter form. The simpler a letter form, the more legible it usually is. So sans serif, without the little feet, little serifs, are typically more legible than serif typefaces. However, kind of ironically, when we're reading a lot of text, like in a book, serif typefaces are easier for reading. The little serifs, little feet, kind of help you move along on that line and keep reading line by line. So here are some legible fonts: large X heights, large counters, simple, not a lot of decorative, not a lot of differentiation between thicks and thins. Some have it more than others, but not an extreme. So Azbuka is very legible, but Buffalo Gal, not so much. You guys see the little decorative doodad at the halfway point here that really kind of throws it off. In the display type, you get every now and then some of these weird ones that are made up of little icons of all things in the medical field. Very hard to identify letters. Look at this word communicating in this font. Looks like 16 wine glasses in a row to me from looking at it up here. It's really hard to tell what that is. So legibility, being able to identify letter forms, is very important. So factors that influence legibility. Probably one of the most important ones is familiarity. We don't live in a world where everything we see is written in black letter type. So what's the first letter in that? What are some guesses? J? Question mark. It is a J, but the fact that you didn't know that, what does it look like on quick glance? We're more familiar with maybe a G, a lowercase g, looking like that, or who knows what. How about the final letter? What letter is that? Nye, what do you think? Give me your guess. B? Okay. Michael, what do you think? Guess.
B as well.
Okay. I don't know. I'm guessing it might be a letter D because I assume it's a capital letter, but it sure looks like a lowercase b. The point is we are not familiar with this alphabet or this type style at all, so we don't have a clue. Another factor is it serif or sans serif? So the little feet, the little serifs, help us identify letter forms. The capital I and lowercase l look stunningly alike, but the serifs are a little bit different. And the minute we take those off in a sans serif type, it looks like 3 lines in a row. If English were not your first language and you looked at that, you would also be hard-pressed to recognize that the smaller of the 3 lines is a capital I, and the next 2 that are actually taller are lowercase letter L's. So serifs can help with legibility because we can identify them as letter forms. Another thing that can screw up legibility is when we do things to our type, we add a style to it. So we italicize it, or we make it bold, all caps, underlined, shadowed, one at a time, used correctly for emphasis on one word or a few words makes sense. But the minute you do this and underline and bold and italicize an entire paragraph, you lose all of the effect. All caps makes an easy type like Arial hard to read because it's hard to identify the different letter forms. Color and value, so contrast is important. Black text on a white background is by far the most legible. The contrast is there, we can pick out the letter forms. Black on a lightly tinted is also very legible, but your tint can't go beyond about 10% of whatever color it is. Okay, reverse type. That's when we take type that's normally black and we reverse it out to white on a dark background. If you're going to reverse type out black text on a black background proves to be highly illegible. You think? Black on black is not written correctly, but you know what I mean. White on black is the best way that you can reverse out if you have to. If you did a grayscale on black, it's going to be very hard to read, not enough contrast. When we do white on black, we sometimes get that optical dazzle. You don't see it on the screen, but on a printed sheet of paper, it almost looks like there's glowing around the edges of the white to the black, and it's not good. So if you do want to reverse out your type, choose a low contrast font with thick strokes. So there's not a lot of thick and thins. And which of these two is easier to read, top or bottom? Everybody yell it out. Which one's easier to read? I'm going to start throwing around the rubber cow. Nia, which one's easier for you to read? Thank you, top. Why is that? What's the difference between these two? It's thicker. Not much contrast. And sans serif. Those little feet on our serifs, especially when they're thin, are very hard to get absorbed into the black ink. You just don't see them. Another thing you need to think about is typographic color of your entire printed page. So when you have text that's tightly spaced, it looks a little bit different than the version on the right, which is widely spaced. And when you're actually looking at this to see if it is good, rather than looking at it on printed paper, face up, normal, the way you'd read it, a recommendation is to turn it upside down and slide it away from you a little bit and see if it looks uniform. Do you see like a uniform color to your type? Or do you see it's too dark in one area or you have big gaps? So we're going to do this, we're going to talk about this where you actually turn the page upside down and view it from a little bit further away to kind of see these things. If you had to read 6 paragraphs, and your options where it's going to be tightly spaced, like you see on the left, or widely spaced, which one would you want to read 6 paragraphs worth? Number 1, one on the left. Oh, you said wide. Sorry, I heard 1. You'd rather read this? Okay. Anybody else?
I'll do the tightly spaced.
This one? Okay. I think in small doses, this looks more palatable, but in a whole page of type, you're going to have a hard time keeping track of where you're going in this. This is harder to read, too widely spaced like this. We're not used to seeing big gaps between letters, and we start to question what we're reading. Too tightly spaced is equally bad, but in this case, it doesn't look as bad. It doesn't look, it's not too tight over here on the left. All right, some more factors that can play into this are stroke weight. So how heavy is the weight of the font that you're doing? So this is a very heavy weight. This is a much lighter weight. How much contrast do you have? Is it no contrast, or Bodoni has more contrast? The thicks and thins are pretty dramatically different. The set width of your type, is it a very wide, like wide Latin? We just saw it in the video. Is a really wide font. In small doses, like a headline, that can work, but you would never set a whole book in wide Latin. The wide typeface would drive you nuts. The different backgrounds, again, contrast, we talked about that already. So a light gray on a light yellow background does not work. The texture of a background, the minute you put something on a photograph, you've got problems almost always. So in this case, they used white, and you can kind of see that they have a little bit of either an outer glow or a drop shadow on it to help it stand out. But that's horrible, isn't it? That's hard to read with that busy background. So if you had to do that, I don't think any other color for the type is going to help it anymore. So then you start thinking, okay, what could I do to the background? Could I maybe make it, add some opacity to it so it's not as bright? Or could I put a box behind the type that is still this picture, but make the opacity of that part of it lighter so that I could actually read maybe black type on top of it? Or darken behind the type. All right, what I want you to do to see the difference in how letter forms can be more legible, easily identifiable, is I want you to typeset the capital letter A, 36 point, 10 of them across a straight line, so they're all on the same baseline. And then I want you to apply a different font to all 10 of them, and try to go for some extremes where you see different widths, different weights. See how a 36 point can be much bigger than the next one in line, and show some real differences and exaggerations here. So if you do this in an Adobe product, you can use Typekit or DeFont. I wouldn't do it in Microsoft Word and just use the first 10 fonts you find there because we're graphic designers. So typeset the letter A in 36 point across a line, 10 of them, and apply a different font to each. When you're done with that, I want you to print it out and then handwrite underneath it what the font actually was. I don't want you to do it after each letter because I want them to all be on one same line, left to right on the same baseline, so you can see these dramatic differences. Okay, any questions? You can go ahead and do that right now.